Well, hello and welcome. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for another AASR Live. We've got a great program today and I'm really excited to have you here. Of course, I am the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, which is an organization I started a little over 3 years ago. Started the Alliance really to raise awareness about the issue of restraint and seclusion at the time happening in schools across the nation. Since I began that work, realized that this is happening not only across the nation here in the United States, but really across the world. Which is a great segue into our speaker today, which I'll get to in just a moment. But this is truly kind of an international issue where very often kids are being restrained, secluded, suspended, expelled, subjected to corporal punishment. A lot of things are being done to kids, very often in the name of behavior, when in fact there are far better things we can and should be doing. The vision of the Alliance is really about safer schools for students, teachers, and staff. With all that said, any of you that have been following us for a while, you know that we don't want to see things like restraint and seclusion happening anywhere that they might be happening. We want to see better ways of supporting and working with all people. So a lot of work to be done. Really excited to have with us today a guest from around the world. I often talk about how international our audience is. We've got people from all over the world: Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Canada, the United States, India, people that join us from all over. Really excited today to have Lynda Knight-de Blois, the principal of the Glenview School in Wellington, New Zealand, joining us to talk about the Neurosequential Model for Education. And if you've been following any of our programming for a while, you may have seen a previous presentation that we did on the Neurosequential Model for Education. Again, another great way of working with and supporting kids. I do want to let you know that during the presentation today, I've talked to Lynda and she is happy to take questions during the presentation. So at any point, if you have a question or even a comment, feel free to put that in the chat. We'd love to see what you have to say, and we'll try to ask those questions as we go. Of course, if we begin running tight on time, we might close the questions for a little while, but I think that we're going to do just great. As always, this session is being recorded. So this is being recorded. It will be available on Facebook, YouTube, and as an audio podcast. So you have the option to go back and look at it again later, or share it with somebody else, which we always encourage. We want to see you sharing these events with, other coworkers or parents or whoever you might be, sharing it with others that might benefit. I would like to ask you that are already on with us live. I see we have a number of people already on live, which is great to see. If you're on, let me know who you are and where you're from. It's always a lot of fun to see who's joining us and where they're joining us from. A lot of familiar names that we see frequently that are joining us for these presentations. And that makes me really happy to see people coming back and joining us for more of these presentations. I think it's a really great opportunity. So with that, you don't really want to hear me talk anymore. So let me go ahead and introduce to you our very special guest for today. I'm going to introduce to you Lynda Knight-de Blois, who I mentioned was a principal of the Glenview School in Wellington and a co-lead of and I'm going to do the best I can here, Lynda, Porirua East Kahui Ako network of schools. And you can correct me in a minute because I'm sure I didn't do perfect. She also has a master's of education, specializing in special needs and Pacific learners, and was trained and has trained with Dr. Bruce Perry in the Neurosequential Network, completing the Neurosequential Model in Education's training certificate in 2021. And I know that is a pretty intensive program. I know that the requirements for that are pretty in-depth. It's a really fantastic program. Of course, she is beginning the Neurosequential Model for Education Advanced Trainer Program this year, which I'm sure will be a really big commitment as well, but one that sounds like it's been paying dividends for you. Lynda's also passionate about sharing what she's learned about neuroscience, learning, behavior, well-being, and has led neuroscience workshops in Peoria and Wellington. I want to thank Lynda for joining us. And I will point out to all of our users and all of our viewers today, it is 7:30 in the morning there on Friday. So you are a day ahead of us. Really appreciate you being so accommodating, because I know that as we work across time zones, it can be a big challenge. But Lynda, you and I had an opportunity to connect probably several months ago and talk about the work that you were doing, which really sounds fantastic. So I'm really excited to have you here today. Have you sharing your work with the Neurosequential Model for Education as well? As we look at a lot of the punitive things that happen in schools, restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, kids kind of getting put on the prison pipeline. There are a lot of better things we can and should be doing. I think the neurosequential model is just one of those things that can really make a lot of improvements. So, Lynda, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here. Really excited to be sharing what you have to share and all of your experience.
Good morning, Guy. Morena koutou from Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's my privilege. Yeah, no, it's very exciting. If it's okay, I'm just going to share the story of our school. I think that encapsulates a lot of
Absolutely. Well, I tell you what, I
work.
will go ahead and bring up your slide deck so you'll have it in front of you here. And let me add that to the stream. And I will let a couple people have weighed in so far. We've got Mickey Marinelli, who is a neuroscientist actually in Austin, Texas, joining us. We've got Lynn from Virginia, retired manager of children's services. So a few people are beginning to join us here, but I will let you take it away. And you and I agreed that I would stay here while you present. And if I have a question or somebody else has a question, that you were happy to take questions during the presentation. So I'm going to make myself quiet so you can take over, but I will. Oh, and our friend Gail from Australia. So a little closer to you there is on as well. And I will be quiet now, but I may pop back up as we get questions that are coming in the chat. So thank you so much. We're really looking forward to this today.
Thanks, Guy. Just before we start, all I can see is my screen. Is that right? Can't see.
That's right. And everybody else now can see you and I. And of course, I'm going to be quiet, but they can see your slide there, the Glenview School and our story. So if you want to take it away as you advance through your slides, they're going to see them. If there's any problems, I'll jump in. We also had Allison just join us from the UK. So we've got a really good international group already tuning in here. So I will let you take it away.
Great. Well, thank you. So you'll see on my first slide, there's a picture there of Dr. Bruce Perry, so a friend and mentor who often tells us that if we want to see systemic change, one of the most powerful levers is through storytelling. And that image that you can see there is from a great podcast called Seen Out Loud, which is a podcast that shares the stories of children and young people that have lived or are living in state care. And there's a couple of episodes on there where Bruce is interviewed on exactly this, on the fact that if we want to see system change, a great way to do that is through stories. So the education system here in New Zealand needs great change. Guy, of course, your life's work is all about systemic change in your country and around the world. So I thought it'd just be, if it's okay with everyone, I'll just sort of talk you through the story of Glenview School over the last few years. So our school is based in a place called Cannons Creek in Porirua in Wellington, New Zealand. So it's a very multicultural community. It's a fairly low socio-economic area of the country, but what it lacks in financial resources, it more than makes up in cultural richness and diversity. So we have children from many Māori children. We have children whose families come from about 8 different Pacific islands. We have a group of Syrian former refugee children and Burmese children from former refugee backgrounds. And I think we have about 2 what we call Pākehā children, so white or Caucasian of European descent. Just quite a small school, about 110 children. We're very lucky in that our staff reflect, certainly in terms of ethnicity, reflect our children. So if we go back about 4 or 5 years ago, the system that is our school, our organisation, was in distress. We had dysregulated children and we had dysregulated adults. So it was a time when we were getting quite a few new children coming into the school, not just at age 5, but older children. And for a range of reasons, a number of them were in distress and we were not coping. We did not know how to respond. We tried. We didn't feel the advice that we were getting from those that should know, from external professionals and people who work in government to support schools. We didn't feel that that advice was working. So we just knew we had to look for something else. the cavalry wasn't coming, we had to find something ourselves. And it was at a time when we were going to a few workshops and professional development sessions with people like Catherine Burkett, who's a local presenter, psychologist, speaks about neuroscience, and also Nathan Makari-Wallace, who's from the South Island of New Zealand and similarly presents to a lot of different audiences, both educators and parents and other organisations. And both of these people were mentioning, of course, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog and Dr. Perry. So once we heard this book mentioned a few times, we thought we need to read it. So I read it, passed it on to my associate principal, and she read it, and it was the proverbial light bulb for us, really. Yeah. And from that, we went on and we did a book study with the book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, with our staff. So there's 6 of us at the time. We have 7 teachers now. 6 of us did the Neurosequential Model introductory series, which is just 5 one-hour modules. And we would expand it. We would sort of work through the modules, but stop them every so often and make connections to our own children and watch a few other bits and pieces. But that was a great introduction for our staff in this work. I went on and did the NME trainer certificate, and now I'm about halfway through the advanced trainer certificate. And then what we did is we went on to develop what we call te aiotanga. So we were really enjoying the learning that we were undertaking. Again, lots of light bulbs coming on, lots of sense making. But I guess the one thing that was missing for us was the local reference and the local context. So we started to develop, and I have to really thank and acknowledge my deputy principal, Lester Mohi, for supporting me in this. Lester's fluent in te reo Māori, the Māori language, well steeped in the culture. And we developed our own framework on the neurosequential work. So it is couched within something called te whare tapa whā, which means the 4-sided house, or whare. Whare is house in Māori. And this is a holistic Māori, kaupapa Māori model on health and well-being that was developed in the 1980s by a Māori academic called Sir Mason Jury, Professor Sir Mason Jury. And it's very similar, actually, once I started to learn a little bit about, not that I know much at all, about the North American Indigenous medicine wheel, very similar with that, the holistic, multifaceted approach to well-being, to health. So we have the 4 sides of the whare: physical well-being, spiritual well-being, mental and emotional well-being, and family and relational social well-being. And within that, we explored what are the protective factors, what are the healing factors of te ao Māori. So te ao Māori is the Māori world, or the Māori worldview. And we looked at different aspects of culture, of everyday life, of aspects of culture that were reflected in our school day and our school curriculum, and just made those links to the neurosequential model. And I won't go into great depth now. I mean, the document, which is actually still a draft, it's a working document. It's available if anyone's interested. But there are just a few in the middle there. If you can see, there are a few concepts. One is takahi. So anyone who's familiar with international rugby will know our All Blacks, and will know that a game starts with a haka. And a key part of the haka is the takahi, which is the stomping of the foot, the rhythm, and that connection between the mauri, or the life force, and the body, and the land, the papatuanuku, the whenua. And of course, anyone who knows a little bit about neurosequential model or about regulation, knows how important rhythm is. So that's just one aspect of the concept. But as I say, it's available if anyone's interested in finding out more. Just jump in anytime, Guy, if you have any questions or comments.
Will do. And I just want to mention to the audience as well, feel free anytime to jump in if you have any questions or comments. But I'm gonna say that I'm sure that document is something that people are probably going to want. So if that's something that you can share, we can make that available through the Alliance if that's okay as well. But kind of a question. You mentioned going back a few years and kind of where things were. And that being a little bit of the starting point of this journey of realizing that there were. But can you tell us a little bit about what that looked like? I mean, what did it look like in terms of the school? What were you seeing? How did you come to realize that we've got to do something different? Can you speak a little more about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit embarrassed to recall some of those days. I mean, we were, as I say, a system in stress. So as a leader, I was under pressure. I was stressed. Teachers were at times very stressed. And of course, children were. So it was a time. So a child would become escalated in the classroom, become dysregulated. And we were doing things like transporting children. So I would be either called over to a classroom to help with an incident, or I would, or a child would be transported to me and popped into my office. And we didn't have seclusion as such, but I guess it's a quasi seclusion if a child is in my office and I sit in my chair and place my chair in front of the door.
Mm-hmm.
And there was restraint. So in our minds, it was, we have the mandate to do this because we're keeping this child safe. We're
Right.
also keeping other children safe. We might have been concerned that a child was going to smash a window or run out of the school grounds, in which case we might have done our best to restrain them, and staff would get injured in the process.
Right.
And of course, we didn't really understand what we were doing at that point.
And I appreciate, because I know you mentioned kind of almost a little embarrassed looking back, but I think it's a really important part of the journey, because I'm sure that at that point in time, there was a realization at some point that, hey, this isn't working, we've got to do something different. But one of the things that we commonly see is people get stuck there, and they get stuck. Maybe they have an inkling that this doesn't feel right, or maybe we could do something different, but it's easy to get stuck. And when you get stuck, you can begin to kind of justify, well, this is why we're doing what we're doing. We have to do it. And that's the space that we see a lot of restraint, seclusion, a lot of very punitive consequences. So, I think it's a really important part of the story. And I think, I think about all the amazing people that I've met in this work, and people that are doing work to bring about change. And so many of them have a story like yours, where there was this moment where you kind of realize that this isn't working. This isn't working for us. It's not working for the kids. It's not working for anybody. And that's the place that I think we need to get people moving. And that's why I'm so interested in your story. But I'm not going to interrupt anymore, but I'm going to come back later and ask a question kind of along the lines of, okay, well, you realize that need for change, and you made these changes, and what the results have been. But I'm sure you're going to tell us a bit about that as well.
Yeah. And
And
I think,
just I would just add here, because this speaks to my heart. Lynn just added a comment here that says, "Do the best until you know better. When you know better, do better." I say that very frequently. I say, that when we can do better, we have an obligation to do better. But that's a hard point to be at, because like you said, you're exhausted, you're frustrated, you're doing things that perhaps are coming in through various channels of guidance. And it's a tough place to be. So thanks for sharing that, because I know it's a tough thing to kind of go through.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think too at the time we were looking for places to put the blame. I was very angry. I was raging against the machine because I felt that we just weren't getting the support that we needed for these children. We weren't getting financial support to pay for our teacher aides. We call them kaiarahi. And yeah, and I was very angry at the people that I believe should be supporting us, and that just
Yeah,
compounded
well,
the
I
stress.
love the analogy there, and I've heard it a couple of times recently, kind of like the cavalry is not coming.
Yeah.
I was at a conference recently. It was kind of like nobody's necessarily coming to save you, but at the
Mm,
same time, I believe. I mean, I believe there's a lot of things we could do to improve education wherever it may be, whether it's in the United States or New Zealand. I think I
mm,
would love to see more resources wherever possible going into education, supporting teachers, supporting educators. But I also believe that one or a handful of people can make significant changes and significant positive difference just by changing the things that they're doing. I think that point that nobody's going to save you, that no cavalry is going to come, while somewhat depressing and demoralizing,
mhm,
is important because it gives you
mm,
that kind of moment of I've got to do something.
mm,
Let me just get to
mm.
one more comment, and then I'll let you continue on.
Yeah.
Gail said, "Congratulations, to you, Linda, that you realized that it wasn't right for anyone, especially kids, which can lead to something different. Many don't realize." Have another comment here from Beth from California. Autistic mom of 2 young adults with autism. Teacher now, private tutor for homeschooling students, many with disabilities. Also an advocate with Lives in the Balance. Another great organization doing great work based on
Mhm,
Dr. Ross Green's work. So let
mhm.
me be quiet now and let you continue on. But I'll encourage people, as you have questions, feel free to put those in chat.
No, that's good. So, yeah, so this is just a summary of what the key learning was for us. So, predominantly about the nervous system. And I say the nervous system, and we know there are several, but I'm just going to simplify it and talk about the nervous system. So, understanding the nervous system being in distress, I think, was a key point. And I'll just work through these subtitles here slide by slide. So, what did we actually do? So, we increased our knowledge of basic neuroscience. So, it is very basic neuroscience because we know the brain is such a complex thing, and even those that have dedicated their life to studying it still only understand a fraction of it. But so, we had some basic knowledge about the brain and the nervous system and how the state of our nervous system impacts our functioning. Um, and understandings of factors which impact brain development and stress. So, we learned a bit more about the different parts of the brain. And you'll see on the bottom left there, if you know a little bit about Bruce Perry or the Neurosequential Model, you'll be familiar with this upside down triangle um, and the way that the brain develops from bottom to top, from the brainstem, diencephalon, um, limbic system, and the cortex, and how different parts of the brain are responsible for different functions. And then if we tip that upside down triangle on its side, we have the arousal continuum or the state dependent functioning continuum, which is something that Dr. Perry often comes back to in his teachings. And understanding this really is crucial to this work. So, many children, perhaps children that have been fortunate to have have had a mother who, when their mother was pregnant with them, had a straightforward pregnancy with no stress and no interurine insults in terms of alcohol or drugs. And then that primary caregiver was well supported. There was limited stress or trauma in that child's upbringing. And so for many of these children, they have a baseline of calm. And we know that if there's that learning requires a little bit of stress, that novelty means there's going to be a little bit of stress. So moderate stresses are thrown into that child's environment and they might move into the alert state. but then they're capable of resetting themselves back to the calm state. However, children that have not had such a fortunate early years, from conception to where they are at the moment, they might have had stresses in their unpredictable ongoing stress in their life. They might have had trauma, abuse, neglect. They develop an oversensitized stress response system, so that they easily flick along the right, from calm to alert, alarm, maybe fear or terror, and they have difficulty resetting back to the calm setting. So we know that of our lower parts of our brain, our brainstem, and even our diencephalon limbic system, if they are not processing well, they're not calm, then we can't access our cortex. And of course, we need our cortex for learning, decision making, reflection, making choices, understanding time. So so I won't talk too much more about that, but in a nutshell, our teachers understanding these processes and these core neural networks and how they function in the brain was crucial to actually this learning and to our ongoing work.
If I can just ask a quick question, Lynda, how did as you began, and you can maybe tell us a little bit more about kind of what the implementation of your training looked like, but as you began to have teachers involved in the training and involved in kind of learning, you hear a term like neuroscience and you think, oh, wow, that sounds like it's really complicated. I've long said that I'm a believer that a little bit of neuroscience goes a really long way. And if you understand a little bit of brain science, you really get a different kind of window into why a child might be having a difficult time, why the behavior might be, what we might be seeing in terms of distress behavior and all of that. But how did educators initially respond to this? I mean, was there skepticism? Were they embracing it? What was your experience as people began to get some of this information?
I think in the early days there was skepticism. I think probably more powerful than these sort of instructional aspects to the program was the book study, I think, and that comes back to the power of storytelling, I think. So those of you that know The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, every chapter focuses on a different child or a group of children and their story. So we would take a chapter at a staff meeting, and people would have read it before the staff meeting, and then we'd unpack it and make those really important connections to children we knew. So I think that sense making, the storytelling, the connections to children we knew was really the powerful part.
Yeah, those stories really give an opportunity for people to kind of imagine, you read through one of those stories and you can think, that reminds me of this child, or is similar to this situation.
Yeah.
And that connection, I'm sure, would be really valuable. But I know it's always a challenge. I mean, I know, I don't know how things work in New Zealand, but I know here in the United States, I feel for educators, as there's always a flood of new training and new priorities coming at them. But this is, in my opinion, one of those things that's so valuable, that really basic neuroscience is so valuable that it can really be transformative to I think an educator. But I certainly feel for the fact that there's so much that's coming at them in terms of priority. It's probably easy to be, oh, okay, what's the flavor of the week? What are we going to do this time? So I was just kind of curious how people responded as you began to dig into some of this.
Yeah. And I think, and I'll talk about this in this slide as well, that, if you are adding on new learning, then to a certain extent you have to think about, well, what can we take away? And I think, when we come to the emotional contagion, so that's that whole concept about an escalated teacher cannot de-escalate or regulate an escalated child. So it's about, are there aspects of our work, paperwork, expectations that we can sort of decrease to look after our staff, so they feel less pressured and less stressed and less likely to be dysregulated themselves. Because we know that wonderful quote, when the adults change, everything changes. by Paul Dix. I think it's the title of a book that he's written. And we certainly saw that if we, looking after staff was a huge investment in looking after children. So, and I've just got some notes here where I just made some notes about some of the things that we did. So one in the bottom right there, you see it's actually a wee little card that we made. So this idea actually came from Matthew Portell, from his great podcast on the Trauma Informed Educators Network. It's the tag in, tag out system. So we just had made up little laminated cards that teachers could have on a lanyard or put on their classroom wall. And it was really just permission to take time out if they felt themselves getting a bit stressed, but dysregulated. They could send a card to me and I could pop into the classroom, or they could show it to the teacher next door, or perhaps to the teacher aide, and they could just pop out the classroom and go and grab a drink. And we're very lucky, our location at school, we're amongst nature. So they could go and have a drink and look at the hills and breathe and then pop back into the class. But
That's great. It's funny before you even mentioned Matthew, he kind of popped in my head as you were talking about the approach that you were taking and being mindful of the staff, because I think that's something that sometimes gets forgotten, is that when you're doing things like this, you're really, I kind of have said repeatedly, you can't be trauma informed for just the kids. You've got to be aware of what staff are going through. You've got to be aware of the trauma that they're going through, the difficulty they're going through. And that's one of the things I've always loved about Matthew's work. In fact, last month was lucky enough to go to the Trauma Informed Educators Network conference in Nashville and see Matthew and so many other great educators. But that idea that you're not just doing something for the kids, it's about changing the culture and the way you support everybody within the system is so critical.
And I think Matthew would say, and Dr. Perry as well, that actually, focusing on the adults is the most important thing. When the adults change, everything changes. So that's in many ways got to be our starting place. And going back to our tag out system, it's there, but actually teachers don't use it. And I think it's just that sense that excuse me, they know that they're supported, they know that they're not in this alone, and I guess it's their own felt sense of safety. They don't, my assumption is they don't feel that sense of threat, that they're not feeling responsible for the children's behavior as an individual responsibility, but they feel supported. So so that's one of the things we did. We also ensured that we have enough adults in the school. So we have prioritized spending on teacher aides, kaiarahi, and other things have probably had to be cut a bit. But there's an important proverb in te ao Māori, which is he aha te mea nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing in the world? It's people. So just to make sure that there's enough people around to support the children and support each other. And we made sure that we support the mental and physical health of the staff. So offering counselling, access to counselling, sick days, mental health days, and just having a general strong culture and ethic of care. I have to say that I can't take responsibility for this solely, because when I came into the school, there was a great culture amongst the staff, influenced by a strong Polynesian culture of care. But just making sure that we continue that and continue the open communication channels, and not too much pressure on paperwork and workload, because we know it makes such a big difference. So then it was about what sorts of things can we put in place to minimise and prevent people feeling stressed, adults and children. So first of all, of course, it's those understandings about well-being and adults being regulated, but also recognising what are the aspects of the school day, of the curriculum that are regulating and relational, and to prioritise and increase these. So, we had learnt that rhythmic activities are important. So just making sure that teachers know this, and they might stop a lesson, they might break up the school day with regular singing, dance. Kapahaka is the Māori term for song and dance. We also made sure that we had quite a focus on play. We increased the amount of time where children were playing at school, and also adults playing alongside them. We're very lucky, as I said, with our access to nature. So especially our younger children spend a lot of time playing in nature.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. I mean, I think that, unfortunately, that's one of the things that we see less and less of, here is, I mean, I believe that nature is very regulating, that getting kids outside can really make a positive, well, getting anybody outside can really make a positive difference. But often one of the things that we see here, and I'm kind of curious if this was an issue for you, are these punitive approaches being somewhat counterproductive, meaning that a child who's having a difficult time, well, what do they lose? They lose their outdoor time, they lose their recess, they lose their free time, and taking that away from somebody that really needs that time to help them regulate is incredibly counterproductive. I mean, did you have issues like that previously? Where there was kind of a punitive mindset and people would lose those things, or was it just something that you began to increase more of as you were moving in this direction?
Yeah, I suppose we did have a bit more. We did have a bit of that. So children would, would lose time at break. Although we made sure it wasn't the whole break, so that they did get outside and they got fresh air and movement. But yeah, there was definitely more of that back in the day. And of course now we understand it. There isn't really. And I should say too that about the same time, about 2018, I went overseas. I was lucky enough to go to Europe, and I went to Finland and Estonia, apart from other places. And a key learning there was, as many people know, that first of all, until about the age of 7, the curriculum there is predominantly play-based. And those countries also lots of time outside, lots of nature, and lots of cultural aspects and music. But the instructional day, even after 7, there is a lot less time where children are sitting down in front of a teacher inside. And so when I came back from overseas, one of the changes we made was to extend our lunchtime for an extra 30 minutes at that point, whereby the teachers and the kaiarahi would go outside into the playground and play alongside children, or some of them might just sit on a seat so that children could come and talk to them. And so that decision was influenced by that trip, but also particularly from the chapter in The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, where Dr. Perry talks about the children of the Waco siege who were rescued and went to live in a children's home. And at that home, there was a range of staff, quite a diverse set of staff. But the point he makes there about how there was that relational therapeutic web where children could connect with people that they felt a strong connection with. And sometimes it might be different people. But within that, so there was diversity of adults, and there was that strong culture of care and a relational web to support the children. So that was part of the reason of giving more time for all of our staff, or at least most of our staff, on any one day to be out there connecting with the children as well. And then there was the response in the moment. So if children were becoming distressed, dysregulated, our teachers understood more about it and about what might have contributed to it. Was it because the children were having less of a felt sense of safety for some reason? That might have come about because perhaps an adult had raised their voice. There is some sort of confrontation, perhaps, as we've said, because the adult was dysregulated, or there was something going on like a physical transportation or restraint that, of course, for many children really triggered them and really threatened their sense of safety. We also made sure that we had places and relationships for co-regulation. So some classes would have something like a quiet corner, a teepee, or something like that. But we also had a particular sofa in our admin block where children knew, especially at break times, that they could come to and just sit there and restore their sense of calm. They might be offered a drink of water. There was an emphasis on limiting the talk, but just staff being there for children if they wanted them, to help them feel safe and regulate. And then teachers might offer opportunities for children to self-regulate. That might look like, for a junior child, walking over to the slide at the playground and walking back. Older children sometimes are run around the field. Just teachers were recognising that sort of moving into that alert state, or further along into the alarm state, and that children needed to do something to help them regulate. Other things were breathing activities. So we'd work with children on various different strategies for breathing and mindfulness, and just a whole range of things, recognising that different things work for different children. And then I just want to say that we do have restorative conversations. So things happen in schools, conflict happens, and we need to fix them up. We need to restore the rupture, but it's about recognising that we have to choose the right time for that. So restorative conversations happen, but not when everybody's in their red brain, as we call it with the children. And then moving on into our understandings about that general and long-term healing and resistance. So knowing that for a child to heal from a background of stress and trauma, they need at least one trusted adult in their life, ideally that therapeutic web of trusted and supported people. We need to increase their felt sense of safety, whatever that might look like. And then we did do some psychoeducation with our 2 older classrooms. So, and that's very simple. It's a very simple curriculum. We just sort of organically developed ourselves, very common sense. Number one being increasing their ability to confidently articulate the emotions that they're feeling. So young children will often be able to say they feel happy, sad, mad, but it's about extending their vocabulary when it comes to identifying their emotions. And then number 2, that awareness of what it feels like in their body when they're experiencing intense emotions. So helping them notice that their heartbeat might increase, that their muscles might feel tight, they might feel hot, so that then once they have more of that awareness, they're more able to self-regulate themselves and calm down. So as I said before, teaching them different strategies they could use for self-regulation. And then finally, just giving opportunities for stretching the resilience muscle. So we know that for children to become more resilient in the face of stress, they need to be offered predictable, tolerable, small doses of stress on a regular basis, so that they can learn to reset back to that place of calm. And it's very much like that muscle in the gym. You've got to have the right amount of weight, not too much, to stretch the muscle so that it develops. And there's that diagram on the right from Dr. Perry about predictable, moderate, and controlled stress can build resilience, whereas unpredictable, severe, and prolonged stress builds vulnerability and causes a negative physiological reactivity in the stress response system. And of course, on the left, again, how connectedness is the key. Your history of connectedness is a better predictor of your health than your history of adversity. And the superpower of humankind is our capacity to connect. It's regulating, rewarding, and the major route by which we can teach, coach, parent, heal, and learn.
If I can jump in for a second, we have
Yeah.
a comment that resonated with me as you were going through this, and I'm like you, and like Dr. Perry, a big believer in the power of relationships. I kind of always jokingly say that the 3 R's of education should be relationship, relationship, relationship.
Yeah.
And in my view, we should be moving away from many of the things that we move towards, like test scores and all of those things that can not only not be a good measure, but can kill someone's joy for education. But all that aside, the idea of relationships and connecting, I think, is really critical. I also think it's really important that um, people can connect with people that understand them and who they may be.
Mm.
And Rosa brought up this really great comment here. And as I began to kind of think about it, really see the value in what's being said here. So Rose said, we also need more neurodivergent staff in school, people who
Mm.
effectively know what the child is experiencing and why, who have that embodied knowledge. And we often think about that. We often think about diversity in various ways, and how it's important to have educators or counselors or others that might be might be better in supporting a diversity of kids. And I think that's really
Mm.
important. But as I think about this, and this is just kind of all kind of very off the top of my head, that thought that um, I think about the autism community and the autistic self advocates that are out there, and we've got a lot of autistic self advocates that are part of our community. And I
Mm.
think about the amazing work that so many of them do, and the tremendous resource. People
Mm.
often look at experts as the authoritative source on things like autism, when in
Mm.
fact an actually autistic individual is really potentially an expert on what it feels like and connection and all of that. So anyway, just I thought that was an interesting comment, because again, I think we often think about diversity in a lot of ways, but I think when it comes to neurodiversity, when it comes to having neurodivergent staff that might have a better understanding of what it feels like to be ADHD or autistic, it's really interesting point.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I meant to say that too, that actually this work for me was really illuminating in terms of understanding neurodivergent students, um, children, autistic children, and children that might have sensory processing complexities, children who some sort of physical discomfort that we might not understand. That discomfort sort of sends their nervous system into distress. And I think that, yeah, that was a big learning for us as well, that we're still talking about that dysregulated nervous system. So understanding that helps us to respond to our autistic children. And I think for us too, it's that connection with family as well. So we have a couple of autistic boys, and they're younger, and I think having that connection with family so that we can really get to know them, get to know what might be causing some sort of dysregulation, what sort of sensory cues might be causing that, but also what strategies and what things can we learn to help them feel more comfortable, help them feel safe, and minimize that distress for them.
Yeah, and I mean, I think another part of that is, again, appreciating that, that we're all, potentially wired differently. And
Mm.
one of the concerns that I have with a lot of the approaches out there, I mean, if we look at what
Mm.
happens with things like restraint seclusion, the number of autistic kids that are affected by restraint seclusion through the roof, absolutely through the
Mm.
roof.
Mm.
And it's a situation where very often the approaches that are being taken are through a neurotypical lens, where an autistic child is doing something that helps them to
Mm.
regulate,
Mm.
but it's been decided that that's not something that we want them to do,
Mm.
and hence aren't supporting them. So I think that that idea of really understanding the brain and the stress response,
Mm.
and not trying to control, not trying to control people, but trying to support them is such an important part of this work, I would imagine.
Yeah. And as my good friend Freanne Wadia tells me, and I think of Freanne actually as the Guy Stevens of New Zealand, um, uh, a great advocate for autistic children, as she tells me, schools just so often traumatize and re-traumatize over
Right,
and over again neurodivergent children.
right.
So the more that our educators can have some understanding, and actually, as you say, have advocates, autistic advocates in our education system to support us all to understand the better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Rose, again, I want to thank you for that comment. And you had another comment here about that connectedness should come from the capacity to do and create and introduce different social opportunities, different ways of communicating. For instance, signing, other
Mm,
non-speaking kinds of connections, valid as well. And this is why neurodivergent staff is so important. Fantastic,
mm,
point there. And
mm,
um, yeah, absolutely.
mm,
So much of it is that mind shift change. I've been thinking about this a lot recently that um, people are often very focused on kind of the quick fix and the tools and the strategies when so much of it is about changing
yeah,
mindset. It's about
yeah.
moving away from these kind of very compliance and control based approaches to connection and
Mm,
and compassion and regardless of who you're working with, I think those approaches are important. And I think the compliance-based approaches are always very concerning to me. And I think
mm,
that in particular, when we look at neurodivergent individuals, there's a tremendous amount of damage that's being done by those
mm,
approaches. So um, I know I've gone a little sideways on you, but in thinking about that mind shift piece, um, you mentioned earlier the stories. Were there other things that were really helpful to you as you were trying to shift mindsets? Because, it's until you can, get people's heart kind of moving in that direction, sometimes it's hard to get their mind moving there as well. So were there other things that you were able to do to bring people along kind of with a mind shift?
Um, I think it was just playing the long game, really. I mean, we'd have lots of conversations as a staff. We might, we tried to branch out a bit so that we weren't just a one man band in terms of just Dr. Bruce Perry. So watch other sort of videos and stories. Yeah, I think I can't think of anything particular other than just sort of persisting, persevering, and playing the long game. And I think then staff started to see the impact that the shift was having.
Mm, mhm, mhm.
And I think, so you're so right when you say it's so much of it happens in the mind. We sometimes have people that ask if they can come and visit our school, and I say, yeah, well, you're welcome to come and visit, but you're not going to actually see a lot. You're not going to see sort of gimmicky programs and things like that
Right,
happening,
right.
because so much of the shift is happened in the brains and the minds of myself as leader and of the staff.
Yeah, but it's really tempting to look for that magic solution, right? It's the,
Yeah,
"Okay, well, one more tool in my toolbox," and when I
yeah,
begin to hear toolbox every once in a while, I kinda go, "Oh," because I get it, I get it, and there certainly are, things out there that are tools and strategies, but,
yeah,
um, there's so much more. I mean, I think,
mm,
in any situation, you can make a tremendous amount of change just by deciding that you're going to do that, that you're going to do something different. And
mm,
it's not even so much. I mean, I'm a big believer. I think a school district that had a lot of restraint seclusion, if they only committed to reducing restraint seclusion and realizing the harm that it was doing, would be able to probably cut their numbers in half, if not more,
mm,
by just making
mm.
that commitment and changing that mindset. I know it takes more than that, but it's such a huge piece of any change is getting people to see that.
Yeah. And that's a great cutting numbers in half. That's a great segue into my final slide. I almost forgot to put this in. I sort of put together the slide deck and then realised, well, I haven't talked about, well, so what happened. So what we saw was a huge reduction in what we would have called behaviour incidents. So those sort of occasions when children were so distressed that in the past the teacher might have needed me to either come to the classroom or might have needed somebody to bring the child to me. So that's gone from something like this is, unfortunately, we don't have very scientific data collection on this. So this is fairly anecdotal, but I would say that probably about 500 incidents a year have gone down to probably less than 5. And those 5 would be like the new children, the 5-year-olds, or the children brand new to the school before they've settled down. And incidents requiring any physical restraint or the old internal stand down, which is like a child having to spend the day outside my office or with me for the day, or even class evacuations, maybe 100 a year to none now.
Wow.
The school has for a long time had a wonderful history of no stand down suspensions and exclusions. So it's been fairly straightforward to continue that. And then the learning. So if we look at some of the children that a few years ago had been quite distressed, now that they're calm and they're focused, they're engaged, some of their learning has just skyrocketed. So I think of a child in this a child who might have had a reading age of around about 5.5, about 3 years ago. A couple of years later is, almost at their chronological age, about 8 years old or so. So I think this is one of our next steps. It's difficult though, because the shift has happened. We want to collect really good hard and fast data to prove to everybody that it's happened. But we didn't have, a few years ago, we didn't have very solid systems for keeping this information, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, and those are tremendous outcomes. Let me ask you another thing. So how large did you say the school was?
Oh, we're only 110 at the moment.
110. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but looking at those numbers, 500 a year
Yeah.
for a principal, and that almost gets to your earlier statement. The cavalry is not coming.
Yeah.
You equipped the educators that were working with the children to work through issues that would have otherwise been looking for you to resolve, right? I mean, is that part of the difference, is that people felt that they or had the capability to better handle situations that might have otherwise escalated? Because what we often see in incidents that lead to restraint or seclusion is a well-intentioned educator that perhaps is escalating rather than de-escalating a situation by engaging in power struggles, by not understanding the science of the brain. Yes, I mean, that's a really amazing outcome to see that kind of change. What about, and I don't know, being a smaller school, how relevant this might be, but has it made any difference in turnover, in terms of staff turnover, whether it be teachers or aides or others? One of the things that, we seem to see is that when people move to better ways, that increases satisfaction and people are more likely to stay. Have you seen any outcomes along that vein?
Staff stability has been really good. Especially actually teacher aides. I don't think we've had any that have left in the last 4 or 5 years. There's been some natural attrition of teachers moving out of town and things, but it is a stable staff.
Yeah, and I mean, these are tough times across the world, I think. In kind of the post, it may not even be appropriate to say post-COVID world. I'm not sure we're really at the post yet, but as kids went back to school last year here in the U.S. and many other places, we saw an increase in stress behaviors, an increase in punitive discipline, an increase in teachers that were leaving the field, and with an outcome that not only reduces referrals to administration and reduces and eliminates things like restraint and seclusion and increases teacher satisfaction. It seems like such a obvious solution, but it's hard to bring about this kind of change. So what you've done, what your team has done is really, really amazing. Can you talk to me a little bit about, and obviously I don't expect you to have the data right off the top of your head, but in many parts of the world, and probably all, it's really difficult to get funding to do things like this. So, you know, I don't want to say how much did this cost you. That's not really what I'm after, but it's kind of how much of an investment was this, and do the powers that be that help to support this work, do they understand the value of what they've gotten in that investment?
Yeah, good question. Just before I answer that, Guy, are you able to stop sharing my
I will,
slides?
and we'll make it you and I.
A real
So I'm
person.
going to go ahead and remove your screen,
Yeah,
and
no,
you are
that's
welcome
good.
to go back to the screen of you and I.
Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
good. How do I do that?
You should be able to go in. So hit the escape button to close your presentation, and you should be able to go back to that tab on your browser.
Yes, good.
Okay. Yep. Perfect.
Yeah. So, yeah, initially when I did the Neurosequential Education Trainer Certificate, I had to self-fund it, pay for it myself. And the introductory series was not so expensive. So our school, we paid for that out of our school budget. And it's been, that's been one of our campaigns, is to try and spread awareness so that the powers that be, our Ministry of Education, actually do recognise the importance of this training for teachers. We've been very lucky in that at the beginning of this year, our local office of the Ministry of Education did actually support us to train 8 staff from across our region to do the trainer certificate. And also they covered my fees for the advanced trainer program. So I think that's about, we start in our communities and then gradually things sort of move out into the wider world. So we haven't yet got our National Ministry of Education really recognising this work. There's a couple of other people in New Zealand who've done the training and are starting to make an impact in their own area. But yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to a recording, a video where Bruce Perry was interviewed the other day, and he said that this sort of system change can take 17 years on average. And I'm thinking, oh no, our children don't have that long, but we keep on working away at it. And there's a team of neurosequential colleagues, so both education and therapeutics, that is just sort of connected in New Zealand. And we've just put on our first national conference in last month in Napier, and it was so successful. There's a lot of demand for further conferences. So we've got another one in Christchurch in October, and we're planning more for next year as well. So hoping to get Dr. Perry out in person. He's been doing online presentation.
Right. So, well, if you ever need anybody come talk about restraint, seclusion, and punitive practices, that's what come to New Zealand. Just put a plug in there for myself.
Sure.
But kind of in that vein of the investment, and I've seen, I know that you can find information about the model on the Neurosequential website. And I'll put that up. And I know it lists the cost of the training on there as well, as I recall. And that's an investment. But I've got to think that in the long term, when you're reducing all these punitive disciplines, practices that are happening, think about the amount of time that's reclaimed for you. There's that 500 instances in a year. Every other day, well, you were probably having 3 instances a day that were coming to your office. This allows you to focus more on the things that you need to focus on. But the less staff turnover, the higher satisfaction. I mean, all that is of tremendous value, and moving things in the right direction. So I hope that more begin to see that. I've got a comment here, and I haven't read through the whole comment, but what I've been able to read so far resonate with me, and it's a big one. So let me share this. This is from Beth, and Beth says that parents tell me their neurodivergent kids take a while to warm up to a new teacher, but are often surprised that their child bonds with me on first visit. It's definitely an advantage to be neurodivergent myself. I feel like I can read subtle cues in their facial expressions and offer a different option as soon as I sense boredom or frustration. I also pick up on interest and try to use them and mention that frequently. My empathy and care for them is real, as I know what my kids and I went through with this. So great feedback as well, kind of piggybacking off of the comments that Rose made earlier. And again, I think it's connection, and it's real connection. One of the things that there was a great book by Emma Vanderclift, and it was called Talk to Me. And the subtitle was something along the lines of what educators can learn from hostage negotiators, which sounds like a really strange title, but it gets into the importance of making authentic relationships. And authentic relationships, I think, are such a core to this work, and so critical in supporting kids and making progress. Okay, well, let me let the audience know here. We've got a few more minutes, so if anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to put those in the chat, and I may continue to ask a couple until some pop up there.
Just while you're doing that, Guy, can I just flip back to what you're saying before about the training and the cost? I think, yes, doing the full certificate is expensive, but actually to do the book study on either The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, or now, of course, Is What Happened to You by Dr. Perry and Oprah.
Love it.
To do the book study is relatively cheap, and actually the introductory series is quite cheap as well. So I think, if a school leader or a key person in a school was to lead a staff through either or both of those things, I think that could have a profound impact for a relatively small amount of money.
Well, absolutely. And now, remind me, the book study that you did, was that something through the Neurosequential Model of education? Was that something formally?
Well, no, that was really before certainly before I did my certificate training. So it was just the book,
something
and
you
at
did
the
on
back
your
of the
own?
book. Yeah. So the back of the book has prompts for a book study, has questions in there as well. And then what happened to you? I think there's at least one book study guide online. And of course, Matthew Portel's PACES Connection at the moment is running webinars supporting people to lead book studies in their communities.
Do you have your own study guide or anything that you developed in support of the work you were doing there?
No, I just used, so for The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, just used the one that was in the back of the book, in the edition that I had. And for What Happened to You, we've used the Neurosequential Model one, but there are other ones available. I think probably through the PACES Connection is one of them.
Okay, and I just put that link in the chat for the Neurosequential Model for Education. It has some of the information about the training. And people were asking about conferences. Let's see. Marion asked any conferences, and I'm going to guess that's Queensland.
Yep, that's right. Yep. It can be. Yep. We're there's such a buzz at the moment. We've had an amazing lineup of keynote speakers. So yeah, we're planning them around New Zealand at the moment, but yeah, there's no reason why we couldn't take one to Queensland. But I'm sure there's also other things available in Australia.
Yeah, I'm just having this random thought, and maybe something like this exists out there, but wouldn't it be great to have a place where we could find all these conferences across the world that are on similar topics? I mean, I happen to know about a lot of the things that go on here in the US, but it's really great to be able to find a place to find all this information. So if anybody knows of resources like that, feel free to put those in the chat.
Might have to start one, Guy.
Yeah, I thought the same, and then I thought, oh, my plate feels so full right now. but even a place where people can share about the events that they're doing would be really great. So definitely, as you have events that are coming up, please share those with us, because we'd love to share them. And we definitely have a very international audience that's always looking for opportunities. All right, let's see. I'm just looking through the chat here real quick. Yeah, and just a number of people talking about the resources being great. Anything? So again, looking back on this journey, and when you started, I kind of took you back to the painful part to say, oh, this is where things were really tough. But was there anything on this journey that surprised you? I mean, was there anything about all of this, kind of going back to where you were at that time? Anything that surprised you about this journey, or any kind of, I'll make this a two-parter, anything that surprised you, and any advice that you might give to an educator or an administrator at a school that's maybe where you were 5 years ago?
So I guess what surprised me is just the amount of, the reduction in my own stress and the amount of extra time that I have in the day. And you've already alluded to that. So it's allowed me to take up this position as a co-lead of our network of schools, which is the Porirua East Kahui Ako. Good attempt at pronunciation earlier, Guy. So through my position as a lead in our network of 12 schools and early childhood centres as well, I have the opportunity to roll out some of this work across a number of schools, including 2 high schools now. So, yeah, I think the surprising thing is just how a principal's school day can look so different once this is in place in a school, and once my own mindset changes as well. My own stress levels have been impacted. So I've said before, my kids cringe when I use the term, but it's like I'm quite evangelical about it. It's almost like finding a religion of being born again, because it just has made so much difference.
That's
And
fantastic.
the second part of the question
Yeah,
was,
kind of thinking about advice that you might give somebody. So thinking about a school administrator that might be where you were, 5 years ago, what would you say to them, or what might you say to an educator that was in a school that was, wanting to change things or needing to?
I think it's about starting with gaining a little bit of knowledge. So, doing some reading, doing some training, because until the understandings change, until that mindset changes, then nothing really changes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's so critical. And even if you feel alone and you're trying to bring about a
Mm,
change, if you start out by yourself and you get somebody else on board, and then maybe you do a book study and you get a few more people on board, building
mm,
momentum. I would imagine. I would imagine you went through some of that where. Here you started off. You spent your own money. You went through some of this training, and
mm,
then you probably had to try to bring others on board. And I know I've talked to others at your school as well that are very much believers and kind of what has happened there, and the progresses
mm,
that's been made. So I would imagine that's really a critical piece of it as well.
mm,
Well, listen, we are just about at time. I've got a couple quick announcements, but before I get to the announcements, one, I want to thank you for, first of all, joining us and sharing your story. This is so important, and this is part of work that we do at the Alliance that I think is one of the most important things we do, which is how do we share with others things that are working? Because if we know,
mm,
kind of what your journey was and what you've been through and the progress that you made, we know that great things are possible, right?
mm,
But we also know it's really easy to get stuck where you are. It's really easy to feel like, well, somebody else needs to solve this problem, or
mm,
we don't have the resources, or whatever it might be. But again,
mm,
it's absolutely something that's possible. So I want to thank you for joining us, sharing your story, joining us so early on a Friday morning.
mhm,
I remember talking to you like, well, we can move the time. No, no, that's fine. And I appreciate your willingness to get up early.
mhm,
You've got a whole day ahead of you. My day is going to be winding down here soon,
mhm,
but appreciate you doing that as well. And appreciate the ongoing work that you're doing, there in New Zealand, and in any way that we can collaborate or support the work that you're doing. Any conferences or events that you want to share, please let us know. We're always happy to do that as well. But any final words that you have? And I just want to again, thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you've done and the difference you're making for kids. I realize, when you said that Dr. Perry had mentioned 17 years, I believe that 3 to 5 years. I'm not saying that everything has changed in 3 to 5 years, but I'll tell you, I think you can change a lot in 3 to 5
mm,
years. The
mm,
first year is really tough. The second year gets a little easier. And I think that within 3 to 5 years, you can make significant changes. And
mm,
you're proof of that.
mm. Yeah. No, I'd just like to say thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for all the work that you do, Guy. And as I started with, storytelling makes a difference. It changes systems. So you have a great role there in connecting people and sharing. other people's stories. So I look forward to hearing many more from many other people telling their stories.
Absolutely. Well, I'm used to you very often being on our live events, and I often say something like, "Well, we have people from across the world, even New Zealand." And then I see you, and I'm like, "Hey, there's
Yeah,
Lynda."
yeah.
Some other kind of closing comments here. Marion said, "Thank you, so meaningful for us all now." Rose said, "Lovely. I would imagine this costs a lot as you're also shaking the system." And system change is certainly hard. I'm going to give a couple quick announcements. I'll let you hang out here with me for a second. I've got two quick announcements that I wanted to share. One is, of course, as always, about our next event that we have coming up. And I know you joined a lot of these, so this might be something you're interested in as well. We have actually Dr. Kevin Ann Huxhorn. Dr. Huxhorn was instrumental in bringing about change within acute psychiatric facilities where restraint and seclusion many years ago were used heavily. And in many areas, they still are used heavily. But Kevin Ann Huxhorn did a lot of work to develop what was called the 6 core strategies to reduce seclusion and restraint, and has some real success stories about the work that she had done in helping to bring about change in terms of restraint and seclusion. One other quick announcement, and let me see if I can get it here. And this might be of interest to you as well, Lynda. We've got a fantastic event that we're planning right now for October. We're working with the Attachment and Trauma Network on an event, and the event is called Compliance to Compassion, supporting students, teachers, and staff in challenging times. This is actually going to be a virtual event, and we've got some amazing speakers coming for that. Some that you probably are aware of. We've got Alfie Cohen, who does a lot talking about rewards and punishment. We've got Dr. Stuart Schenker and Susan Hopkins, self-reg, who talk a lot about stress. Emma Vanderclift, who I mentioned earlier, Jim Sporleader, a lot of great people joining us for that really fantastic event. So you can actually, now that is open for registration. I will put the link in the chat as well. I also have a better link for that, but I will just put the one I can easily grab right now. And that kind of wraps up our show for today. And again, want to thank you so much, Lynda, for joining us. If you just hang on for 1 second, we'll end, and I'll just thank you offline as well. This has really been a great opportunity to hear about the work that you're doing, and I think that every change makes a difference. And although there's a lot of work for us to do across the world, you're changing the outcome for kids, you're changing the outcome for teachers, you're changing the outcome for families. So thanks so much for all that you do. All of you that are watching, you are also helping to bring about change. Thanks for being part of this. Please share these, broadcasts with other parents or other educators so that we can spread the word and try to do better things. Thanks so much. Take care.